if Charles would be so kind as to explain how the knighthood or the orders of knights came to be in medieval Europe, and if he could give some examples, or if he could make up a modern day knight order from scratch. Wow.
Well, um, okay, basically, knighthood um, originated basically from the church Christianizing the warlike activities of the Germanic peoples. The idea of converting their Viking-like ways into defending the church and the weak and so forth, and transforming their native virtues of loyalty and so on into holier things. That was already beginning. But what really gave it the form that we know are the Crusades. And it was out of the Crusades that the religious orders of knights came. Because they devoted themselves to taking care of the sick and pilgrims. But in doing that in the Holy Land, they soon realized that they needed protection. And I don't mean protection like Uncle Rico used to pick up. I mean protection.
Gotcha.
So these orders started as orders of hospitaliers, and they became military. And they had several differences. I mean, there was the order, the Knights Templar were called that because their headquarters were near the temple in Jerusalem. The Knights Hospitalier and the Knights of St. Lazarus had, in the area of Jerusalem they call the Muristan, they both had hospitals. But the Lazarus Knights were exclusively for lepers. And then the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre was sort of the bodyguard of both of the Holy Sepulchre and of the King of Jerusalem, the Latin king. The Teutonic Knights ran the hospital of St. Mary's Teutonic Hospital in Jerusalem. And then, in imitation of them, you had orders develop on the other great frontier of the Crusade, which was it was Spain and the Reconquista. So the orders of Calatrava, Alcantara, Montesa, Santiago, and Aviz, and what's the other one? The Order of Christ in Portugal. So these were religious orders like any other, except that they had two major goals, each of them. One was to look after the sick and the weak and the traveling, the pilgrims, and the other was to fight the infidel. Now, they were so good at what they did and so admired that various kings in England, in Europe rather, in England and France and so on, thought that it would be great to have similar orders of knights for them directly. So you had the Order of the Saint Michel in France, the Golden Fleece in Burgundy, the Order of the Garter in England. And these became organizations for the king's closest supporters and most loyal noble followers. Well, that's how they began. And then, of course, with the loss of the Holy Land, with the exception of the Templars who weren't quite able to do it, they all found ways to reinvent themselves to deal with the changed circumstances. The Templars could not, and they were eventually suppressed. Whether or not they were guilty of the crimes that they were accused of, I do not know. As far as starting an order of knights today, well, knighthood is a separate thing from the orders of knights. There are three ways you can become a knight. Three kinds of people can make you a knight. A bishop. That's why there's in the old Pontificale, there's a ritual for making a knight. So a bishop could do it, a king could do it, and another knight can do it.
Who came up with that rule? What is that from?
Well, if you want chapter and verse, I really can't give it to you, but it was the accepted way of doing things very early on.
Okay.
Now, over time, bishops and other knights, less and less and less, came to do it. And more the kings began to do it. Just as in the beginning, knights were not purely of noble blood. But in different countries, as time went on, it became more and more restrictive. And then, of course, after technology drove the knight off the battlefield, it became primarily an honor rather than. So there are a lot of orders of knighthood today that are decorations and so forth, but they're not corporate bodies the way a religious order is, and the way the Knights of Malta are, or the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Teutonic Order.
Do you think an order of knighthood is it possible that one be created out of necessity in the future?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, and there have been such groups recently. There's been a Templar revival as a Catholic religious order. There are all sorts of bizarre Templar revival groups, but I mean a real revival, as in religious living under the Templar rule, with the approbation of the Church. They're the Knights of the Immaculate, they're a French group. There are a number of these groups around, all of whom go through the making of knighthood, the ritual. For myself, I've thought long and hard about this. I think, regardless of whether or not one forms new orders, I believe that it would be a good thing for the knighthood of the Pontificale to be revived by bishops, primarily for apologists. I mean, so that you get the graces for combat that the ceremony confers, you say. So this would be a good thing to give to, as I say, professional apologists and catechists and people like that. It would be a good thing for Catholic army officers. All that. You see, I do believe that the graces that come down with that particular ceremony are graces that are certainly needed today.
Okay, a couple questions stemming from that. So how come the revival orders of knights are so obscure now?
Well, primarily because most of the hierarchy really aren't too interested in them. They're not really interested in anything that has to do with nobility or knighthood, etc., except when it's a question of getting rich people like the Order of St. Gregory from the Pope. And then they're interested. They're interested in the orders to the degree that they bring in money and grease the skids. But they're not really interested in chivalry per se.
Is there any bishop in the United States who does this, who will make knights?
I don't know.
You would think Cardinal Burke, this is up his alley to some extent.
He might.
Because
I have no idea.
I don't know
I really don't.
I don't know if bishops know or have even considered this.
Well, remember, any bishop who exclusively uses the post-62 rites will not have seen this in the Pontificale.
So that's part of the problem.
Yeah. So, see, also, since Paul VI, all of the military and nobiliary and all that elements of the church have been obscured. He abolished, for instance, all of or almost all, not all, but almost all of the hereditary positions at the papal court. And he turned the papal chamberlains, who had these really neat Renaissance era uniforms, costumes, into gentlemen of His Holiness. Now, the gentlemen of His Holiness, a lot of them still came from European noble families and so forth, and it's still a great honor. But in 2013, the current Holy Father, now gloriously reigning, announced that he wouldn't make any more gentlemen of His Holiness. And their job is to attend the Pope in the Vatican, so you'll still see them. But no new ones have been made since 2013. Because, and it was the same with getting rid of most of the papal army, the noble guards, who were noblemen, the Palatine Guards of Honor, and the gendarmerie. All they kept was an ununiformed gendarmerie and the Swiss Guards. they got rid of the rest of the papal army. And Paul VI did something else, which I thought was not a very nice thing. Rome had its own nobility apart from the papal creations. And in 1870, when the Italians took over, the Roman nobility split. The white nobility recognized the new government. The black nobility refused to. Now, these were people whose training and position in society fitted them for service in the government. The foreign office, governors, things like that. And those who recognized the new government did just that. Those who refused no longer had the entree to professions that their status had entitled them. But they gave that up out of loyalty to the popes. So, to reward them for this, in 1929, when the Lateran Treaty was signed, then the Vatican city-state was created, the so-called black nobility were given Vatican citizenship. Paul VI took that away in 1969.
Why?
He felt it wasn't in keeping with the times. Paul VI would often say that when there was asked, why are you getting rid of this? Why? It's not in keeping with the times. We live in a more egalitarian age, and people don't do this sort of thing anymore.
I don't know if I should ask this next question because it's a little accusatory, but did Paul VI verbally or through action retract any of these sorts of things that he did? Did he express any regret over anything he did?
I have no such knowledge. And it was funny. The noble guards, who, as I said, were all noblemen, and their unit descended from another unit, a couple of units that they'd been in the papal service for centuries. And this was snuffed out all in one day. They asked for a special mass and ceremony where they could lay up their colors in the Vatican. And the secretary said, oh no, just give them to me. There's no need for that.
Well, that certainly gets your blood boiling, doesn't it?
It got my blood boiling when I was a little boy, and it doesn't cease to do so now.
Wow.
I told you Paul VI is not really one of my favorites. I thank God for Humane Vitae. I've no doubt he's a saint in heaven. But I suppose it's because of the sheer misery of his last 10 years, brought about by Humane Vitae.